Welcome to my first ever painting tutorial. Today I'll be painting a beautiful bouquet of flowers in a glass jar. What's great about this project is you can use up colors that you already have at your disposal. Whether you have extra pinks, blues, metallics, whatever colors you want, you're going to make something unique and beautiful. I'll show you what colors I'm going to use. Let's paint. So I'm going to use this nice peacock blue for my background, at least as a starter. So you want to put a nice medium-sized blob on your plate, about that big. So I'm going to start with that, and with a large brush or a foam brush, whatever you have, we're going to paint the whole canvas. So like you're painting a fence, just up and down and nice smooth strokes just to get a nice coat of color. We're not being very particular right now. We're just getting some color on the canvas and relaxing, having some fun, and really enjoying our afternoon. So at this point, really not doing anything special. We're just letting the cares of the day just float away and enjoying this beautiful paint color. I would say that doing the background is probably my favorite part because it's not particular and you get to have fun with the colors. I really enjoy just having like multicolored, streaky background. This kind of technique you could also use to make a wooden looking background, water, northern lights, whatever you want. So just get a nice coat of paint on the background. You're gonna have this kind of streaky looking blobbiness on your canvas right now. And if you do, that's great. That's where we wanna be. So now I wanna add a little bit of color in with this nice blue. Something a little bit lighter. So I have a turquoise color that I'm going to use. And so just a small blob of that on the palette. Now, you could also use a light blue, like I have a tropical blue that, actually I'm going to put that on my plate as well. You could use purple, you could use maybe even a few streaks of yellow whatever you think would look nice and show your personality, you can use that. So I'll just show you what's going on my palette here. So I have the blue that I was once using, and I put a little bit of that turquoise and a little bit of that tropical blue in there. So I didn't really separate them because what I'm going to do is dip my brush in the dark blue, pick up a little bit of that turquoise, and also pick up a little bit of that light blue so that your brush kind of looks like a marbly, swirly creation. And you want to do this while the peacock blue is still a little bit wet on your canvas so that you can get a little bit of a blend. So here's what that looks like with our little marble brush. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's already starting to look pretty awesome. I love those bright colors coming through and just little streaks of, especially the turquoise. It always reminds me of the Northern Lights, and I think that's quite beautiful. So just up and down streaks. Try to go right from the bottom or top to bottom, either way. And a nice trick for getting those nice streaks is, okay, for example, if you just press the whole time, then you're gonna end up with a streak like that. But if you press your brush light and then harder down on the brush and then light again and then go over it a little bit, then you get a little bit of variation and not just a starting streak right in the middle of your canvas. So I'm just gonna blend that in a little bit because it's not too late to fix that, especially when the paint is still wet. Okay. So you can push down, lighter, and then just go over it a couple of times. Now I'll let you see what happens if we go over it too much. So say we press down and we're like, oh, okay, I want to blend that out. Okay, keep blending. I'll blend a little bit more, just a little bit more, and then we end up losing the effect. We can see that this one is quite a bit more pronounced than this. And these kinds of streaks are more what you want because you want to have that contrast of color between the dark and the light. And it just adds to a really nice, vibrant background when you have both. Once you've added a few randomly spaced streaks, you should have something that looks like that. Another tip of things you want to avoid is once you have a few streaks and it looks pretty decent, we want to avoid the tendency or the desire to keep painting. It's like, oh, well, I could add a little bit more there, a little bit more there, and then what happens when you start to add is the canvas underneath starts to poke through. So it's good to know when to quit. Just add a few streaks, don't go too zealous with the details. And one of the hardest things to do, but one of the best things to do once you've reached this point, is to stop and walk away. So this is what my background looks like. So I have the dark peacock blue and a little bit of the turquoise and the tropical blue poking through. And at this point, it's not really a big concern about what the background streaks are doing, because a lot of it will get covered up by the flowers anyway. And that's a nice trick too. If you find a spot that maybe doesn't look so great, or maybe the canvas is starting to poke through a little bit, what's great is we're gonna add flowers. So you could put a flower, nice big flower, over top of that mistake. Not that we wanna have a lot of spots where we need flowers, otherwise we're gonna lose our whole background, but it is nice if we do make a mistake that we can just cover that over. Okay, so now you're gonna wanna let that dry. If you have a hair dryer, that might speed up the process and give that a nice little blow dry out. And then we'll work on our flowers. As you can see, I made a bit of a boo-boo. I accidentally had a little glob of paint there that I tried to fix after it started to dry. Big no-no. And the canvas started to show through in a big way. So I'm just going over it now, again, with a little bit of blue paint to try to cover that up. Again, that was not the right thing to do. But sometimes it's just so tempting to try to fix something right away rather than wait for it to dry. So anyway, I am now adding a little bit of blue paint to that hole that I created and blending it in a little bit. Oops. And we'll be on our way in a moment. Now that we're ready to paint again. Not perfect, but I'll cover that up with flour. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the stems. So I already have a lot of that turquoise left, so I'm going to use some of that instead of green. But if you want, you can use a green, you can use leaf green, hunter green, whatever green colors that you want, or you can use brown or black. Today I'm going to use a mixture of the turquoise color and a little bit of the burnt umber brown. Just going to put a little dot of that on the plate. And also the black. And I'll show you what that looks like here. Okay, so here I've just put on the burnt umber color onto the plate, just a little dollop there. And we're going to crack open the black. Just put a little dot beside there too. So if you have green, that's great. If you have some other kind of color that you want the stems to be, feel free to use whatever you desire. And remember that this isn't going to be the forefront of the show. Like the flowers, the petals, those are going to be the main colors that stand out. These are really just a background color. Okay, so I'm going to use a small brush, or you can use a medium brush. If you have an angled brush, this works amazingly well. Today, I don't think I grabbed an angle brush out of the brush box, but that's okay. I'm just going to use a smaller sized brush like this. Okay, so you can take a little bit of the brown, a little bit of the black, and I'm gonna steal some of that turquoise over here. And I'm going to mix it around just a little bit get kind of a marbly look. I don't want to totally lose the colors, so if you see that you're losing all of the green or turquoise, or just grab a little bit of that. And that's what it should look like, a nice little marble color. As I said before, these are kind of in the background. The stems aren't really stealing the show, so we don't want them too pronounced. If I use just straight turquoise, for example, that's probably all you would see. And plus I've already used turquoise, so you know, it would just be kind of a little bit of a mess on the background. So I'm going to try using this marble color and going to paint some stems. Okay, so here I have the marble color. I don't know if that'll focus, but I can kind of see it there. Okay, so just nice. I'm wiping both sides so that it's a little bit more pointed, a little bit more like a pencil. So where I want those stems to be, just going to throw a few little sticks, and you can put a few extra little streaks down below so that you can see that there's something going on there in the jar. Doesn't necessarily have to be connected to anything, just so that there's some kind of stick shapes going on in the jar. And then you will make a few longer stems up out through the top, and that's where some of your flowers will go. So I'm going to make like a nice long swoopy one out to the side here, just like that. And I'm going to put flowers all along that stem later on. And just to add some interest, I'm going to put a little swirl like that out to the side, just for something kind of random and fancy. And maybe another little swoop like that. Whatever looks good to you, whatever you think has balance in your picture. Sometimes it's really hard to tell at this point what it's going to look like or what's going to happen. I mean, if I said, okay, everybody, we're done, I don't think you'd be very impressed. But this is the beginning, and as you go along, you'll start to see, okay, yeah, maybe I should have added an extra stem, and that's okay. Later on, you will have the opportunity to add a little more when we're touching things up, but for now, you just want to add a few sticks. And I know it's kind of hard to see that there is a bit of black and a bit of that turquoise blended in there. Yeah, but it is a much lighter brown, like it's not just a straight black, so it's not something that really stands out, but you know it's there. And when you see these stems in the jar, then it'll make the bouquet look a lot more full, and you won't have to paint as many flowers, but it gives the idea that there's a lot more in the jar than there is. Okay, so now we'll let that dry a little bit, and then we will start adding some beautiful colors. Okay, so now we will take our paintbrush. Oops, I touched a little bit of black. Oopsies. So we'll dip in a little bit of white, wipe off both sides like I showed you. And the first place to start, where I'm going to start, is the very top. So I'm going to figure out, okay, whereabouts do I want my jar? I don't want my jar right to the bottom, but I do want it a little bit raised above. So I'm going to put the mouth about, oh, say about here. So just a nice little swipe across, very, very light, just so you can see where the top of your jar is going to be, okay? So then it's like you make a little M going down, and that's the mouth of the jar. Little M on the other side. Beautiful. And you don't have to dip your paintbrush back in. Like if it starts to get a little bit of streaky, that's okay, because it's glass. You don't necessarily need it to be a thick solid line anyway. So just a little brush of where, okay, that's where the bottom of the jar is going to be. And for me, I'm going to bring the jar out a little ways. Oh, I've never painted with looking into the camera before. Something new for me too. Okay, so that's the top of the jar. And then we're going to make lines. And I'm drawing it kind of like holding a pencil. and I'm resting my hand on this part. Not always the best practice, but I'm doing it because I know that this part is bone dry. I've used my blow dryer on it, so I'm not totally concerned that I'm gonna streak paint, but not the best practice, but this is how I like to paint these little details. You can paint it like this as well, and I could too as well. So I'm just making very light brush strokes, just so that I can get kind of an outline of where that jar is going to go. Because this is probably one of the most stressful parts of this whole painting. But you're doing just fine if you're following along, and you know, if we're beginning, this is how we learn. And I had to start somewhere too, and my paintings aren't perfect. You just saw the mess that I made earlier. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And really, if something really terrible goes wrong here, put a flower on it. Does Bob Ross say, happy little accidents? It's now a bird. Well, it's now a flower in this case, and that's alright. Okay. I would have my jar come to about here. And we'll just make the bottom. Okay, so that's my jar. Not a super fancy jar, but it does the trick. I don't know about you, but this is this is basically what ends up happening if I get flowers. I don't really have very many. I think I have one flower vase, so I like to put things in mason jars. That's kind of what this is starting to look like, which I really like things in mason jars. I think it's pretty. Okay. So now that you're done that part, while I'm here now, I'm going to put a little streak, very light, across the top to show the top of the jar. And now it's starting to get the illusion that this is glass, because you can see up here where the stems are, and it's not a solid thick line, just a streaky, very thin, kind of faded out line. And that's what you want to give that glass illusion. Okay. So we'll add a few more details to this jar and then come back to it after a little while. So once you have your outline, then we can add a few little streaks to the top like that to give the illusion of light. And a few little streaks here. Just like that. And same with the bottom of the jar. Usually it's kind of a pain when your paint starts to get kind of gradient and you know your brush is getting dry. In this case, it really adds to the illusion that it's glass. I think you can see where it's kind of getting a little bit streaky on the end of that and on the bottom here. But from farther away, then it's starting to look like an actual glass jar. Okay. And this is gonna seem like going against your instincts here, but we're going to add some larger streaks just like that and let it get gradient on the front. Just to add to that glass look. And in this case, if you have kind of a blob of paint on your paintbrush, start it at the top so then it does get kind of that little bubble, and then brush down until there is no paint left on your brush. Not necessarily going all the way to the bottom, but letting it fade out that way. Okay. And I'm going to dip my brush in and really wipe it off so that there's barely anything there. So you get those nice gradient lines, and I'm going to add just a few little highlight lines like that to the top. Just nicely wiping off my brush there. And same on this side, just adding a couple of lines here so that it gives the idea that there's a little bit of a lip, that it's bubbled, so you start to get a bit of a more of a 3D effect of the jar. And when it's this close, it's kind of hard to tell. It's like, oh, well, what's actually happening? So sometimes it's good to take a step back, to walk away a little bit from your jar, from your painting, and then you can see that your jar is looking more and more 3D, which is exactly what we want. Okay, and on my little jar here, I want to add a little detail. You can do this or you can leave it as is, that's up to you. When you step back and you look at it and you think, oh, that looks great, that's exactly what I wanted, or that looks perfectly well, then just leave it. You don't have to add this little detail. You can even put letters if you want. You can add joy, home, life if you're feeling adventurous. I'm gonna add a little heart in that kind of gradient looking dry brush white. So I'm dipping it into the white and brushing it off, so then you can kind of see the brush through it, like there's not a lot of paint on there. Okay, so now I'm going to paint a little heart. Oops, ran out of paint. Going for a little bit more. Okay. Oops. So it kind of looks like somebody painted on it, or a little bit of etched glass, just something kind of cute and adds a little home feel to it, I think. Okay. Okay. So if you want to add any more details to your jar, if you want to add ribbons or whatever you want, that's also an idea. You could paint on a ribbon, put a little bow here, whatever you feel like. Just kind of go crazy. Use whatever creative ideas you have. You don't have to paint exactly the way I'm painting. Okay. Okay, so that's my little heart, and I'm gonna leave that alone now. So my branches are pretty dry still, They're definitely dry. We've left them for long enough. So now we're gonna start adding some color. So for this part, if you want to pick what main colors you want, for myself, I'm going to pick a deep, like a darker red. This one is called Christmas Red. I used to have deep red, but deep red and ruby red and another red, I think. But this is what I have left over, so I'm going to try to use up this Christmas red. So the flowers are going to start with the darker color, and then I'm going to add white or other colors, maybe a little bit of yellow, to fade them out to add more detail. So you want to pick one main color if you're following along the way I am. So you could use purple. If you're going to use purple, I would suggest using a darker purple and then adding light purple on top to add the details and to add the highlighting. You want to start with something a little bit darker anyway, because it's going to start to get more and more light, and eventually we will add even straight white to pop some of those colors. So you'll see what I mean while we do this. So I'm going to start with that red and put a nice little blob on my palette, my plate. It looks like, whoop, short sleeve. Okay. I'm gonna pick up some of my blue actually that I have on my plate because I have so much of it and I hate to waste. I'm gonna mix it into the red. Ooh, then we get a nice deep mauvey purple. So I'll show you what that looks like. So here we have that red, and I just scooped up a little bit of that blue and plopped it into the red on this side here and mixed it in. And we get quite a pretty purpley mauve color. So when I put this red on the plate, I just wasn't feeling it. I was thinking maybe it was just a little bit too rich, a little bit too bright for what I wanted. I wanted a little deeper color. So this mauve will work perfectly for my purposes. And actually I'm gonna add some of that red in. Marble it a little bit, so then if we get little flecks of that red in the flowers, I think that will look quite beautiful. Yeah, I'm the type of artist who likes to improvise or likes to just see where the canvas and paint take me. I usually have like ideas of what I want to do, but I really enjoy just seeing what happens. Sometimes I try mixing a little bit of color here and there and I'm like, hey, I like that, that's great. So feel free to have fun and to experiment with the different colors. And what appeals to you and what you put on the canvas really shows your own personality. And that's what I find exciting about my paint classes, is when I'm doing a paint party, I get to see the different personalities and different styles. And we might all start out with the exact same colors, but no two paintings ever look exactly alike. And that's really fun and exciting for me. Okay, so now that I have my mauvey red concoction here, I'm going to start with these larger flowers. Okay, so there isn't even a stem here, but this is about where I want that flower to be. So I'm just gonna make a nice swirly circle like that. And nothing really fancy or exciting. And there's a little bit of extra paint there, so I'm just gonna continue the swirl, make it a little bigger. Okay. I know it looks just like a purple blob, and that's what it is. But it's gonna get better from here. This is just the background, and with all of my paintings, it's just layers upon layers upon layers, and at this point it's not going to look like much, so don't get too discouraged. Okay, so now I'm going to paint a smaller circle, a little swirl there, and here, and start making it kind of arch out a little bit. Don't ask me what kind of flowers these are. I usually leave it up to each painter's imagination, and sometimes I have friends who are actually into gardening and know all about these different plants, and they're like, oh hey, that's a whatever it's called. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Just kind of go with the flow and just paint what I can maybe remember from walking out in nature or being at my gardening friends' houses. And so you can make, at this point you might be using a brighter purple, you might be using a blue, maybe some metallic colors. I think that would be really pretty to have all metallic flowers. Why not? Okay, so there's that. And what I'm going to do is mix a tiny little bit of white in with that purple color. Just a tiny little drop so that it's just a little bit lighter. Okay, so here I have scooped up a little bit of white and I've mixed it in with that mauvey purple color. So I'm going to take that purple, that light purple color that we made, and you see this swirly bit? I'm going to just put a couple of little teardrop shape colors on there, just like so. Start here and just kind of press my brush down and give it a little wiggle, and that kind of makes the little teardrop shape. Whoops. Okay, well, see, that's an example of one of the little accidents that can happen. So I got a little bit of paint there. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna make it into a little flower. Wasn't exactly where I was gonna put a flower, but hey, that's okay. I'm gonna put one more here. That looks pretty good. Maybe just a little one on the end. Like so. That looks nice and bright from back here. Okay. Now I'm gonna take that color and show you another little flower shape. Same idea, but instead we're going to put two together like that, and I'm putting it over top of this flower so that we start to get a little bit of depth going on these flowers in the background. A little dollop here, a little dollop there, and just moving along this stem. At this stage, it's okay if your flowers are still a little bit wet, but you don't want them sopping wet or have them be glistening, glowing little paint blobs. But you see on the big brush, you see on the larger flower here, through the light you can kind of see that there's a little bit of streaks left, but it's mostly dry. At this point in time, that is fine to continue painting. If you feel more comfortable, then feel free to go ahead with the blow dryer and get that a little bit more dry. I find that if I leave a tiny little bit on those larger flowers, you pick up some of the color and it kind of blends nicely. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to use some of that lighter colored purple that we made with the mauve color and some of that lighter, some of the white, sorry. So this light purple color, I'm gonna add a little bit of white to that and swirl it around a little bit and see what happens. Okay, so we have this kind of whitish, light colored purple. So I'm gonna pick up some of that and, surprise, some of the dark color that we also used. So we'll get a nice blend. So we'll see what happens here. So we're gonna use just nice light streaks around and go around in sort of a circle, but not really touching. Like, we don't want to just paint over what we've already done. Just a few little streaks like that. And pick up some of that color again. I'm just gonna add a little center on that. So that's what that looks like. And some of the pieces don't even have to be touching to give the idea that they are all connected together. Like so. Just as long as you have a few more in the center to make it look more bulky. And like it's a full plant. Like so. Okay, and I'm gonna bring this over so that it's starting to spill over. Get the shape that I want. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then to add onto it. So I hope that this video finds you relaxed and that it's a little bit of an escape. You know, I get lots of comments from students saying that painting is very therapeutic. So I agree, I think it's pretty awesome. Okay, I'm just gonna add a few little dots in here. And while that's drying, we're going to take our smaller medium-sized brush or whatever, or if you have to wash your small brush and use it again, that's fine. So while this is drying, we want to add some highlighting to these larger flowers, and also, didn't forget about these guys, the little vine petals. So I'm just going to take some white and make a very, very light purple color. And take some of that light purple color that we had earlier. I'm going to place it right there. And I'm going to take a large glob of white and mix it in. You can see that, like, you almost can't see the purple color. And that's kind of the highlight color that we want. We want this very, very light purple color. So now that we have our highlight color, I'm going to use a small brush, or small medium brush. Highlighting just to some of the spots on the flower. And just on the tips, like it's like the tip of the petal that's getting the sun. You want just a few little streaks here and there. It doesn't even have to be on every one. I've gone a little heavy-handed on the highlighting on that one. I'm just going to go back in with a little bit of dark purple. That's better. Try not to overwork the flowers too much. If you need to go back and add just a little bit more color, just a couple more little spots with the darker colors, that is fine. You just don't want to overwork it, because then we will cover up all of our beautiful layers. Again, we have to know when to walk away. It's very hard to do. Okay, so there's that. And I'm gonna mix my lighter purple color with some of that highlight color. Get a nice little swirl. So you want that light purple, like this. And we're gonna add a little bit of detail to some of these petals. So for this one, very lightly, we can even add just the bristles from the bottom up. Like so. And these ones, you want to make sure that they are pretty dry for this part. Just a little dollop of that white color. Like so. And I'm going to take a little bit more white from my paint palette, and here, something, just the tip of the bristles. I'm just giving it just something a little different, just to add some personality. Just a couple little flicks of the paint, just with the end of the brush. So dipping into the white, light purple mixture, and just a couple little either flicks with the brush, or you can go ahead and just kind of stamp the tip like doot, like that. That works as well. And then one little stamp for all these bottom ones. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to take my washed small brush, and we're going to add a few little white flowers, just to add something to this bouquet. Kind of ties it all together when you add white at the end. So I'm going to take just straight white, and I feel like this side of the canvas is lacking a little bit, so that's where I'm going to throw the baby's breath. And if there's somewhere else, if you see a gap or somewhere that maybe isn't quite as balanced on your bouquet, then this is a great opportunity to fill it in with some baby's breath. Okay, so I'm just going to do the same thing, basically the same thing I did with the white, just maybe like a little bit heavier, bigger circles maybe. I'm going to really load up the paintbrush with paint. And I'm gonna make like a little fork there, and off to the side maybe just do a little cluster as well. Maybe put a few dots on this on this yellow. Just to add a little something, I'm going to add a couple little dots just in and around this bouquet. They don't really make sense, but yet somehow they do. When you step back and look at it from afar, it kind of adds something to it. Just a little bit of beauty, a couple little beauty marks just in and around the bouquet. Beautiful. And I'm going to take a little bit of that light colored purple, and I'm just going to add a little bit of that color to some of our streaks here on the jar. Oops. Just like it's almost kind of reflecting that color. Not to cover it, but just to kind of wipe my brush off and tie in that jar with a little bit of that same color. Kind of makes the picture a little bit more complete. Maybe a little bit more believable that these are together. And I'm just going to add a little bit to this lip. Wipe off my brush a little bit here. You see where I made a little mistake too? You probably caught that already. I accidentally brushed my white paint on that. Had I caught that earlier, you can just soak a napkin and wipe off the white paint right away and it'll come off just fine. But this one is pretty bone dry now. So I'm just take a little bit of my blue and go over it a little bit and just pretend that never happened. At this point, you may also want to take your small brush and take the white and clean up the outside of your jar a little bit. Now that we have all those beautiful details and we know where our jar wants to sit, we can take our brush, and once this is dry, keep in mind, you can rest your finger here if you need to, and just go over some of those lines and just make them a little bit more solid. Don't have to worry about making them too thick, just that there's at least a solid line. Especially if it's a little bit wiggly. Like maybe when we first started this, we were a little bit more nervous, so our outer line might be a little bit wavy, but that's okay. That's why we're going over it now with more steady hands. And there you have it. There is your bouquet of flowers in a jar tutorial. I hope that you like this video and we can paint again sometime. See you!